What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm James and this is Clearwater Fishing, and today we are talking all about crankbaits. The types of crankbaits, where to fish crankbaits, how to fish those crankbaits, and the equipment that you should be fishing with to effectively fish with these crankbaits. Before we get started, I want to thank you guys for watching this video and watching my channel. If you haven't already, right now is a great time to subscribe to the channel. I do all sorts of fishing related topics, how-tos, fishing technology, all the way down to how to catch your very first fish. So make sure you smash that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. So there are three main types of crankbaits that we're going to go over here. There are also subcategories as well, but we're going to cover three main types here. The first one here is called the Lipless crankbait. I've got a couple here to show you guys. So this one is a crawl color. Then we have another one that's 6 cents. I'll show you why I picked this one out here in a minute. And then sometimes lipless crankbaits are referred to as rattle traps, which is not 100% correct, but kind of correct because rattle trap is just a brand. This is a rattle trap crank. This is just a silver-sided rattle trap. So they come, obviously they're all plastic in this case. You won't find any wooden balsa crankbait, lipless crankbaits, because the idea of these guys are to sink. And as they come through the water, they do a little vibrating action. Well, this vibrating action, causes their rattles to rattle. And there's different kinds of rattles. So this one has a bunch of little BBs in it, and so does this one that mimics a crawdad. And then like this 6 cents one here, it's a knocker one. It's got really big BBs, so it makes a knocking sound. Just a little different presentation. So when you're picking these guys out, kind of keep that in mind of what kind of knocker they have, or rattle, or BBs they have in them. So the next ones we have here are called squarebills, obviously defined by their square-edged bill. They have a different stance in the water when you pull them in the water. They like to stand more vertically in the water column, which is kind of beneficial when you're fishing around wood structure. It kind of keeps them from getting hung up in that wood. It's not foolproof. You are still going to snag wood if you are really in thick areas, but for the most part their stance is pretty high. Now the other thing here is, they come in plastics like this one. They also come in wooden categories as well, like this Bagley. This is balsa, has no rattles in it, but this Lunker Hunt has like a single knocker in it. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Let's try that again. Has a single knocker. And then we have more of a rattle type. And this guy has lots of little BBs in it. Sounds a lot like many of the lipless crankbaits we were listening to just a second ago. There is another subcategory here we're going to talk about real briefly because it is kind of important. There's a rounded side, and then you have a flat-sided squarebill crankbait. Now what this does on the flat side is makes the wobble on these guys real tight. So it's more beneficial for when the water's colder to have a flat-sided squarebill. That way the action of the crankbait is much tighter and looks like the fish is moving not as erratic. So the last category here is the roundbill. So this has got a rounded bill, and these guys are definitely designed to go deeper. So you can have shallow, medium, and deep diving. Usually you won't find any lip crankbaits that will go much more than about 20 feet unless you add weights or have some kind of trolling system where they're really far out there. This one is a wooden one. Has no rattles on it whatsoever. Let you guys hear that real quick. Has a flat side, so it's going to have a tighter wobble. It's going to be, this one primarily will be used in early spring when the water is still cold. It's because it has the flat side and it's going to have a tighter wobble. There's some that have knockers in them, like this Bomber A. It's got some really big BBs in it. So it has a unique sound and is probably considered a medium diving crankbait. This is a 7A. It's made out of plastic. And then you can get to some of the really big ones. This is a 6XD. This is a summertime crankbait used in the summertime deep diving. Has lots of noise. Designed definitely to get the attention of the fish. Has a big, huge, wide bill and a round body style to get some massive wobbles to make these rattles really kick. Next, let's talk about some of the areas and the time of year that you should fish some of these guys, starting off with the lipless. So the lipless, you're going to be wanting to fish these guys late winter, spring, and early summer. Early summertime, you're going to want to fish these guys over grass flats, maybe not the red color, maybe more of a shad imitation color here, a golden shiner. This guy, this color, the crawfish color, you're going to want to do in late winter to early spring. Kind of fish this over some grass flats. And in the summertime, when you're fishing this guy, you're probably going to be wanting to slow roll this guy over some pretty deep rocks or structure or cover that your traditional lipped crankbaits really just can't get to. So you're going to let this guy sink all the way down and then just slow roll this big guy on the bottom and letting it have its slow roll crank going on. Boom, boom, boom. And then all of a sudden, the fat Sally's going to just come up and just annihilate it. And then you're going to have a really good day. But like I said, lipless crankbaits, I typically use them late winter, which is the pre-spawn stage, up until spawn. Then that's what I'm calling early spring, over grass flats, maybe some secondary points that are maybe a little deeper, and some areas like that. And then I told you guys about my summer techniques there. Oh, I kind of forgot about the fall one. This is where the rattle trap comes really into play. So in fall, the schools of bass will chase bait around and actually have them bunched up, typically out in the middle of cuts, and push them up further into some of these cuts. So if you can find a way to follow and chase those bait balls, throwing a rattle trap around those bait balls and getting beneath them or near where the bass are feeding, a rattle trap is a great place to get their attention. So squarebills have a typical game plan that's similar to the lipless as far as the late winter and early spring categories go, because they just don't have a very deep dive to them typically. You can fish these guys over grass flats, ripping it through grass and that kind of thing, and late winter and early spring, usually in a red or a crawfish color. And you're going to do really, really well during that time frame using a squarebill. If you're using a squarebill, you're probably in maybe a wooded type area, because these guys are pretty good at getting through wood. It's not always the best fishing technique, but if they're hitting this red color pretty good, it might be worth a few snags to fish this guy. So the next technique and area that I like to focus on using squarebills is in the fall. And that's primarily because sometimes these bass will pin the bait balls toward the bank and near wood. Therefore, you want to use something that's relatively good through wood and can get you a few bites without snagging too much. Lipless isn't going to do that great in shallower areas like that. But if they got them pinned near the bank, a squarebill is a fantastic option. Especially if they're pinned up in the water column. If they're a little deeper toward the bank, you may not want to use the squarebill. But if they're kind of in the shallower areas, definitely a squarebill is a great option in the fall. The last area that I like to fish squarebills in is also in the wintertime against riprap. Areas of rock that you can just go down the bank with lots of rock, beat these guys off of the rocks and get some really good action off of that. Make sure in the wintertime you're using more of a flat-sided squarebill. That way the pattern is much tighter. At this point, you're probably going to want to move away from rattles. So here's a wooden one that I like to use in the wintertime. Provides a lot of great benefits, especially if those fish are up in the water column near the warmer rocks on maybe a little warmer of a day, and just trying to gain some energy to feed. So the last category we're talking about, once again, is going to be the Roundbill crankbait. This is probably viewed as the workhorse crankbait, mainly because if people think about crankbaits, this is what they're thinking about and what they're picking up. So in the late winter and pre-spawn time frames, the early spring, you're going to want to be fishing maybe this red color or crawfish color and hitting a lot of those pre-spawn points, main lake points, those secondary points, as fish start to move up shallower and start to feed and get ready for their spawn. Crawfish color is great. Make sure you're hitting rocks or structure of some kind, bottom, but you definitely can move and keep a flat profile. They'll keep a little tighter of a wobble. Rattles versus non-rattles. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, but overall, definitely great to use this kind of crankbait in the late winter to early spring. Summertime is a time where the deep diving crankbait with bright colors excels. You're going to want to fish these on deep main lake points. The 6XD goes down to like 18 feet. So he's going to provide a lot of depth for you, a depth range. Make sure you're hitting structure and cover, rocks, shell beds, even nearby brush piles. Don't cast on top of the brush pile, but cast nearby those brush piles. That way you can make sure you're at least going to get some attention from the fish and make sure that, you're in the vicinity of where the fish are, because that's where they like to hang out in the summertime, is deep main lake points near cover. Wintertime's also a fantastic time to be using roundbill crankbaits. Like I talked about earlier with the riprap on the squarebills, kind of the same scenario with these guys. You're going to want to focus on riprap, the sunny side where the rocks are starting to warm up, and kind of identify what water column depth that these fish are hanging out in. The roundbill is going to provide you a little more versatility as far as finding the right depth, so you're going to be able to go from a shallow to a medium to a deep. And just remember, wintertime, these fish are starting to wash out in colors, so you're not going to want to use anything that's super duper bright. It's just not going to look right to them, and they're not going to want to hit this as well as maybe just a washed out pale color. You could probably use this guy if you took some sandpaper to it and washed out the colors and made them look a lot faded and a lot less glossy and bright. But overall, I like to pick out crankbaits that won't be as shiny or as predominant of a profile and actually kind of look a little subtle. That way the fish are still attracted to it, but it looks more realistic to them and it looks correct, so they might actually eat it. And the last place here we're going to talk about is the fall. Once again, we're chasing these bait balls around, and depending on the depth range that these fish are at, you can pick out different types of shad colors. This is a white. I didn't pull out any of my shad colors, but I have plenty of those. But you want to pick out shad looking colors, chase those bait balls around up in those cuts, and kind of identify kind of where they're hanging out, whether it's like 15, 16 feet. You're going to want something a little deeper. And then in this case, you're not going to be actually aiming for structure. You're just going to be kind of swimming around the bait balls and seeing if you can trigger some bites. So the next area we're going to focus on here is how you should be fishing your crankbaits. Well, first let's talk about kind of your cadence. You're going to want to be fishing according to what the water temperature is doing. So the higher your water temp, well, summertime, you're fishing one of these guys, you can't crank it fast enough. Crank it as hard and as long as you possibly can. In the wintertime, you're going to want to kind of slow your cadence down just a little bit, just so that the wobble is not too extreme, the sounds are not too extreme, where you're kind of matching the fish lifestyle at that point, where it's not really fast, but it's slow and methodical, and if they're using a lot of energy, it's for a reason. So just remember, try to match the cadence up to the time of year, and sometimes that means you have to experiment with your cadence a little bit, whether it's 5 reels stop, for 2 seconds, or it's a continuous slow cadence, or you're just burning this thing hard as you can and making the most racket and getting the most attention you can. Next, the most important thing probably is that you're hitting structure with these guys. Whether you're ticking grass with a lipless crankbait or a squarebill, or you're deep diving down into a rock pile or a shell bed, you want to make sure you're touching some kind of cover and making sure this guy has even more erratic movements and kind of make it look like it's having a hard time and maybe possibly dying, which makes an easy meal for a bass. They're going to swallow that guy up. But overall, you're looking to make that look just a slightly bit different than the other bait fish that are around and just trigger a reaction bite from those bass. So you always want to make sure you're trying to hit something. Unless you're chasing those bait balls out in fall, then you're not going to be necessarily trying to hit something. You're just trying to get a reaction bite from those feeding bass at that point in time. So the next question about how to fish these crankbaits is always, well, how do I pick out whether I need to have a rattle, a non-rattle, or a knocker? How do I know what to pick? Well, honestly, here's my theory on the situation. Late winter, early spring, you kind of want to avoid the rattles, the real loud rattles. You can use knockers. Knockers are probably pretty good. They're not as predominant of a sound and provide a little bit of attention to those baits. But overall, you may want to just completely avoid sound in general, just because, hey, they provide a lot of weird sounds to the fish, and they're not used to hearing that much sound after all winter long. It's been pretty quiet, low fishing pressure. So a lot of these guys will be scared off by a lot of sound. So you want to stick to something that has almost no sound. As we move into the warmer months, you kind of want to start to stand out. So you want to use brighter colors here and all that good stuff. And on top of that, you're going to want something that has some pretty loud rattles. This one's got both knockers and rattles, so you're going to want to make sure, hey, I'm fishing something in the summertime that's going to provide a lot of attention. Now, I said those general rules in both kind of areas. Fall is kind of a mishmash of whatever the fish are liking at that point in time. Typically, as you get into late summer and moving into fall, you're going to want to move away from the rattles because they've gotten a lot of pressure and have heard this sound all year long or all summer long, and they're just kind of sick and tired of it, and they know what that means. So my final rule about rattles, knockers, and silent crankbaits, well, start with your general rules, and then if those are not working, try the exact opposite. If a rattle's not working, well, go silent. If a knocker's not working, go silent. If the silent is not working, well, try a rattle. And if it doesn't work the first time, maybe it's the area that you're fishing, move to a new area and restart with whatever the original rule was, whether it's silent or with a rattle. Try that again and just kind of move back and forth until you actually pick up a pattern on what these fish are triggered on and move on with that. Because sometimes the rattle will work in the wintertime when the water temperature has jumped up 5 degrees and they're ready to actually feed for a little while. Maybe you do need a little more attention to get there. And sometimes water clarity plays a role in the rattles and such. Because of dirtier water, you want some more attention. You're going to want to make some noise with these guys and get their attention. So finally, we're down to what type of equipment do you need to fish these crankbaits. So let's start off with the small crankbaits, the really short guys that are typically, we're going to say from 1 to 5 feet here, but usually about 2 inches long or so, 2 1/4. You're going to want to fish these guys on a spinning reel, usually with some light line, and the rod you're going to want is a medium power, moderate action rod. And the reason you want the medium power, moderate action is that you're going to have a lot of bow available to pin these fish with the hooks. You're not going to be able to power these fish out, so you're going to want to use that rod to keep the hooks pinned to that fish and get it in. And that's because you're using a light line and you're not going to be able to power these fish through. But using the light line, you're going to get the optimum depth to these cranks. Next, we're talking about the medium diving crankbaits, or the medium-sized crankbaits. That would include maybe this guy here. Medium size, we're talking from like 2 1/4 inches to maybe 3 inches, 3.25. But overall, you're going to want to use a bait caster. Slow roll, we're talking like 5 or 6 gear ratio with an appropriate amount of line, like a 10-pound test fluorocarbon. And the rod you're going to want to pick out is a medium heavy power rod with a moderate action tip if you could find one. Sometimes that's a little harder to find on the medium heavies. You usually get a fast action tip, but you're going to want a medium heavy with a moderate action. Like I just said before, you're going to want to be able to pin these guys and have lots of bow into your rod. That way the fish won't get a lot of slack and you keep the hooks pinned to the fish. Now the big cranks, we're talking like the deep divers, the guys that are 3 1/4 inch and longer. I got 2 options here. I'm going to go either with the medium heavy with a fast action tip. That's going to allow a little bit more bow. And that's probably for the little bit smaller category of crankbaits and maybe a little less depth. And that's where that's going to excel pretty well at. Or you can go with a heavy action rod with a moderate action tip. That's going to be the key one to get the 6XD, the 10XD, all the way down to its depth. You're definitely going to want to use the heavy power rod. But for most of us, we don't have that in our arsenal. But both of those will work for these larger crankbaits. And I'm using the rule of thumb here of 12 foot or deeper. And most of these are aimed at the roundbills and the summertime cranking. I might have mentioned this earlier, but the type of reel you're going to want as far as speed goes is you're going to want something that has a 5 or 6 to 1 gear ratio. And what that means, if you don't know, is for every rotation of the handle, the spool will spin 5 to 6 times as well. So you're going to want to get the most torque you possibly can out of your reel, because some of these guys, like this big one, it takes a lot of force to get it down to its depth, and having that more torque on the bait itself is going to help you not be tired at the end of the day. Also, another thing, remember, if you're fishing big crankbaits, you're going to want big handles. So the longer your handle is, the more torque you can put on the spool, and the less tired you're going to be at the end of the day as well. And I did mention line choices a little bit earlier, but overall, you're going to want to get the line that is the smallest that you can get away with. So I'm going to just throw this tiny Squarebill out. You can probably get away with 6 to 8 pound test. On this guy, you're going to be wanting to fish 12 pound test, maybe 14 pound test. And the type of line is where you can fine tune these guys. Fluorocarbon sinks and is going to help you get the maximum depth out of this because it has a smaller diameter for the same pound test versus mono. So you're going to get maximum depth with fluorocarbon. But with mono, you're going to get a little less depth because the line's a little larger for the same pound test and it likes to float. So you can use your line choices to fine tune your crankbaits. So this may be an 18 foot diamond crankbait, but say I only needed to go to 16. Well, I can either choose a larger line size or pick up a rod and reel that has mono on it. It just, if you're really getting to fine tuning crankbaits, definitely the line choice will definitely help you get to the depth that you're looking for. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me and watching my videos. And you guys are fantastic. Remember to smash that like button if you enjoyed this video or learned anything about it. Don't forget to leave me a comment below if you have maybe some other pointers that I didn't point out here as far as overall fishing with crankbaits. And don't forget to smash that subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed to my channel. But you guys remember, just like always, until next time, get out there and go catch you some fish.